Good morning, everybody. I will just quickly introduce myself before the slides come up. My name is Robert Nij, working for the European Commission DG Energy in the unit dealing with energy efficiency. And more specifically, I'm heading the team that's dealing with energy efficiency of products, so dealing with Ecodesign, energy labeling, Energy Star, and some voluntary agreements in this area. And I am doing this since 1st of December last year, and before that I was working in the same unit on the implementation of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, so a bit of a cross-cutting overview here. I mean, this will be familiar to you if you look at products and what we do in the area of products, at least from a Commission perspective. Then we have the usual directives that we have in place: Ecodesign, energy labeling, the Energy Services Directive, which became the Energy Efficiency Directive, which also says something about products, and then the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which indeed also says something about systems. And then more voluntarily the EU Eco-Label and Green Public Procurement, where we also provide criteria that member states and others might follow. If we look at the existing regulatory framework, and then specifically looking at Ecodesign and energy labeling, we already incorporate, I would say, systems, and what Niels already mentioned, the extended product approach. And we do that already today. The methodology that has been put in place allows for that approach, both strictly on products as well as on extended products, technical systems, and possibly functional systems. So that is eminently possible, and in the methodology, the latest update that we did, this is an example that's been given there, where you can see that you can go from a motor, you can add the drive, you can add a fan, you can add other things, and then you end up with a system, a ventilation system in this case, where we are already, since December last year, we've put in place a regulation that talks about ventilation systems. So this is already happening today. It's nothing new in that sense. And another example of motor systems, I'm not going to go into detail because there is a session specifically devoted to this, but according to our scenarios, if you look at the different levels of criteria and you compare the green with the purple line, then you see that adding to a motor variable speed drive immediately creates a lot of additional savings. So also this is already covered by existing legislations. And then as a final example of where we have already moved beyond a simple product approach is the installer label, as it's sometimes called, for heating systems, whereby we are allowing from September 2015 installers to, I would say, market packages of products, in this case packages of a boiler with controls, with a storage tank, with a solar panel, and through a simple calculation can give them a label and give them an energy class, an energy efficiency class, so that they can show that not only the boiler, but in combination with other products, you end up with more efficiency. So in this example, the boiler can be an A+ boiler, but the overall systems can be an A+ system because you add the other components to it. Obviously, we don't really yet have any experience with this because it's not yet coming into force, but it will be very interesting, at least from our perspective, to see how this works in practice and whether there is added value to such an approach. Then moving, so just to indicate that for products we are already able to accommodate to some extent for systems. If we then look at the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which is a very different sort of directive, I would say, we introduced with the latest revision in 2010 requirements for technical building systems. And member states have to set requirements, set system requirements for such systems in terms of the overall energy performance, in terms of the proper installation and dimensioning, adjustment and control. They have to do this for new technical building systems, for replacement and for upgrading. And subsequently, they have to do this for at least heating systems, hot water systems, air conditioning and large ventilation systems, or combinations thereof. So here we have, for the first time in European legislation, clear requirements for member states to tackle systems. Now, this directive came into force in 2010. There was a transposition deadline in the middle of 2012. have seen some member states already implementing this requirement, others not. And so it's still somehow early days to see what member states have come up with in terms of implementing and transposing this in practice. But I can give you some examples, so to give you an idea about the variety of things that are out there. This is what the Netherlands is doing. They've put in place a table with system performance requirements, which have to be calculated for each of these systems differently through some complicated calculations. And subsequently, they've said, well, in order to facilitate the implementation, not only for people building and installing these things, but also for market surveillance purposes, if you have these kind of things in place, for example, a room heating system consisting of a condensing boiler with high temperature release system and insulated piping, then you are considered to fulfill the requirements of 0.71 of a system performance. So this is a way, let's say, of simplifying the implementation of this specific requirement. There's some other examples out there. So one example of how the requirement in the EPBD for technical building systems has been implemented. Another example, this case from Hungary. They've taken a somewhat different approach, whereby they've said, well, for heating systems, temperature control by rooms, they say when installing a new system or modernizing an existing one, what you then have to do is, it is recommended to implement per room temperature control based on economic calculations, and then also some partitioning when it comes to multi-apartment buildings. So here you see a very different approach, I would say a bit looser, as it were. Also not really putting in place strong requirements, but say it's more of a recommendation. Now, we of course from our side will have to look at one point whether this complies with the directive, because one can argue that this is not really putting in place a system requirement, but mainly sort of guidelines why it would be nice to do this or that. To give you another example, there are some regions in Italy, for example, that have said, well, if you have an apartment building of more than 4 apartments, you can no longer install individual boilers, but you have to put in place a central heating system. Another example of how you can interpret system requirements for technical building systems. Again, there the question is, is this allowed? Can a member state simply say, well, we don't allow individual boilers anymore once an apartment gets over a certain size? It's a system requirement, but it has some issues also with internal market force. So, those are some examples of how the EPBD is being implemented, and you can see that there are very, very different solutions out there in terms of how to deal with this. And we haven't seen all of them because not all member states have yet fully transposed this specific article of the EPBD. Just to mention that the Energy Efficiency Directive, as I said already, is also touching on products. This is mainly in the area of procurement, member states being forced to buy energy efficient products, buildings and services, and the link that has been made with the existing instruments such as the Energy Labeling Directive, where member states are supposed to buy only products that fall into the highest energy efficiency classes, but obviously the fact that it has to be cost effective and economically feasible and link it to competition means that there is definitely some leeway for member states to interpret this and to implement this in their own context. I know we are going to talk about lighting in more detail, so I don't want to dwell on this too much, but just to show you that, for example, in the case of lighting, all these instruments have already been applied. And we have Ecodesign criteria, we have energy labeling for lamps and luminaires, we have the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive that, while not obliging member states to put in place system requirements for lighting, it tells them to take into account lighting when they develop their national calculation methodology for the energy performance of buildings, as well as the fact that the cost optimal levels that they now have to put in place have to take into account lighting, specifically for non-residential buildings. As I mentioned, the Energy Efficiency Directive also talks about lighting systems in the context of the building renovation roadmaps that member states have to establish, so there's another tie into buildings there, as well as in their national energy efficiency action plans. And then under green public procurement, we have established, as I mentioned, non-binding benchmarks for lighting systems, both indoor as well as street lighting, and the EU Ecolabel also touches lighting. So we have already a suite of legislative, whether binding or non-binding instruments that cover, in this case, lighting, both from a product perspective, the bulb, as well as from a systems perspective, for example, in the case of street lighting. So this in terms of an overview. Now, what are the challenges, at least from where we are standing? First of all, I mean, and this is not rocket science, of course. It's clear the question is, where does a product stop and where does a system begin? As we've seen now, there's a clear example with technical building systems in the EPBD. We have requirements under Ecodesign for heating products, boilers, space heaters, as well as water heaters. And we have technical building system requirements at national level that member states have to set. And here we see that they touch somewhere. And the question is, where do they touch? And this will be different in different member states, because member states under the EPBD have much more scope to interpret this in their own context, whereas Ecodesign is clearly an internal market legislation. That brings me to the second point. So where does the internal market stop? Where can we, as the Commission, with responsibility for ensuring the well-functioning of the internal market, where can we set criteria to ensure that products placed on the market are the same and are treated the same everywhere in Europe? And where do member states have the power to set requirements that have an impact also on these products, at least in terms of whether these products can subsequently be used in technical building systems as they are regulated. So there is a question there, and we are bumping into this question, as I mentioned the Italian example, where a boiler that complies with all the necessary regulations, including eco-design and energy labeling, might no longer be de facto placed on the market or used in a certain building because national regulations prevent it from happening. So there are issues where this causes problems. There is a question of the placing on the market or the putting into service. So we are already seeing, this is not per se a product systems question, but we, for example, see in the case of complex set-top boxes, where we have a voluntary agreement with industry, that there are manufacturers of these products, they sell them into Europe to service providers, the service providers put some software on it, and the software and then the installation actually creates the energy performance of that product. Now, there is a question about if the service provider upgrades the software, what happens? Is that a new placing on the market? Because that software update might well significantly impact on the energy performance, whether negatively or positively, that's not necessarily clear. So there are questions there about how this is being dealt with. Who is finally responsible for this product or for this system as it's being placed on the market? The same goes for industrial products, where we see that the installation is really bespoke. We have products, we are now working on professional wet appliances, so we're talking about industrial dishwashers or washing machines or laundry dryers, where we see products which are basically industrial products. They are tunnel washers, for example, which there might be 150 being produced every year and placed on the market. They're very specific to the use of the customer, and so the question there is, how do we deal with that as a product? Is it a product? Is it a system? And how do we deal with market surveillance there? It was already raised by Niels, because this product is installed. It's there. It's not something that you can pull off the shelf, send to a lab and test. You have to go into a site, you have to test it. What if it's not conform? How do you deal with that? Do you stop the product being used, or do you ask people to make changes? Do you do a recheck? There are all kinds of questions out there that make it not so straightforward to foresee how any systems approach would work in terms of compliance checking. For example, the example of the Netherlands with the implementation of EPBD requirements on technical building systems, it's a way to deal with that by saying, well, if you have this standard system with some insulation of piping, which we can easily check, then you are supposed already to comply with the requirements. And then finally, the question for us, of course, is what is the most suitable legal instrument? We saw from the BRE study that there are some ways in which one can go about checking this. But it is a question for us because of the fact that we are trying to deal with these instruments. And this is what will be coming in the next years in terms of these instruments and their development. We will have, of course, the mid-2014 review of the Energy Efficiency Directive. Those of you who have followed the recent publication of the Commission communication on 2030 will have seen that energy efficiency was not very prominent in that paper, basically because the Commission has said energy efficiency, we will have the review, we will have to see where the member states and where we collectively are towards our 2020 targets, and on the basis of that we will have to see whether further measures or further targets are necessary. Now that is a debate that we will have towards the middle of the year. We are currently working on an impact assessment and on communication towards that. So that will be a moment when a debate can be had about, is there a need to, for example, tackle systems more comprehensively in the current legislative framework. Secondly, we are already working on the review of the energy labeling and parts of the Ecodesign Directive. We do this in full transparency, so you can be and should be involved if you're interested. On the 18th and 19th of February, we will have stakeholder meetings where we are discussing the first findings report from the consultants. So we'll see there also how the issue of, for example, scope extension is dealt with in that context. And this is, of course, an ideal opportunity to try and see whether for systems we need to do something on energy labeling and eco-design or not, for that matter. And then finally, by 2017, the Commission has to review and, if necessary, revise the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. And also in that context, by that time, we will have more experience with what member states have done in terms of implementing Article 8 on technical building systems. And that will allow us to evaluate, has this worked? Where has it caused problems in terms of the existing, for example, eco-design measures for certain products? And is there a way that we have to change the legislative framework to ensure that this boundary is clearer, I would say. And then finally, not on here, but we have also started working on the next work plan for eco-design and energy labeling for 2015-2017. And in that context, we will look again at what kind of products, whether energy or non-energy related, have to be included in the further work that the Commission is going to do under eco-design and energy labeling. Another opportunity, I think, to look at products and systems and whether we should include systems more, I would say, structurally, as it were, in the work that we are doing under these two directives. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
If you look at it historically, we have reduced the energy consumption in our housing stock, in our buildings, we have reduced it per square meter. We have and kept the same heating consumption in buildings. This figure goes back to 1990, but even if you use 1980 as the starting point, you will find the same figure, that the heating floor space, the heated floor space has increased. It has increased with close to 20% from 1990, and the final energy consumption per square meter has fallen somewhat 13%. So that the consumption in 2012 is the same as it was in 1990. And these figures are, as it's indicated, adjusted for climate variation from year to year. So the building code is one of the ways that we regulate the energy performance of our buildings. It's of course mostly addressing new buildings, and new buildings are minor part of the building stock, but still I'll use this as an example in order to describe how we look at buildings, because we look at buildings on three levels. Well, our building code started in in 1960. We had other kinds of regulations before that, but at the 1960 we put them together and got this building code, which has the status of an executive order, which are supposed to be applied universally, and it has detailed technical regulations on the design and also on the use of the different kind of buildings. Energy have had its own chapter since 1979. That's just a couple of years after the oil crisis. And from 2010, we started including indicative goals for the requirements in 2015 and 20. So we will reduce the allowed energy use in buildings in 2020, so we will reach the nearly zero housing standards, which are in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. And these indicative targets for 2015 and 20 has already been included in the 2010 code. So the industry, all the actors, they know what are the aims, and these targets are also political agreed between the government and the opposition in parliament. So they should be fairly secure that these are going to be the targets. Okay, if we look at the code, how it is constructed, then it has three levels of regulation. The first level is what, just like Niels talked about, the system level. You set standards for the entire building and the building's interaction with its environment. And that's what we call the energy performance framework. You look at the building, and you look at the building with all its equipment, and you look at how much energy from the outside is needed in order to use the building as it is intended for. So you look at the building with the ventilation, the cooling system, the system for hot water production, and so on, and you look at how much heat from the outside, how much energy from the outside you need in order to get the building running. This level gives flexibility for the designers to design buildings as they want, as they find proper to do, and they can put more photovoltaics or solar water heating system on the building, and then loosen on the insulation or loosen them on the requirements on the windows. So this is the overall regulation on buildings. Then we have, so to say, another level, sorry, which is somehow a safeguard. You take back some of the flexibility which are given to the designers on the system level, and you say, okay, you look at the envelope, and there are certain limits for how the envelope has to perform. You cannot just put out a shanty house in Denmark and then put a lot of photovoltaics on top of it and say, okay, this fulfills the system requirement. So there are requirements on on the performance of the building envelope and these elements that consist of the that are within the envelope. So if we refer it to Niels's different levels, you could say that this is also somewhat on the system level because it's focusing on the building envelope. Then we have the third level. Now we're down to the products or the appliances, more or less. And here you look specifically on the building elements, the services as they're called, heating system, ventilation, and cooling, and you look at the units or the different elements, the boiler, the circulator, or the windows, and you regulate. You set a minimum performance that they have to fulfill in order to they are allowed to be used. So this is what is on eco-design level, or so to say, and it sets limits for the transmissions losses that or the energy use as you are allowed to have in the building. And this third level also works for renovation or existing buildings, because you have requirements for windows, you have requirements for boilers and circulators and the systems, and even if you replace or you renovate, you have to fulfill these requirements. We consider those requirements on the third level to be very moderate, so to say. We don't think we are very ambitious on the requirements for the individual building elements, but we put the stress on the two upper levels and try to tighten the energy performance of building by tightening those requirements there. Nevertheless, we've seen that our national requirements for gas boilers, for instance, or for heat pumps, electrical driven heat pumps, used to be tighter, or are tighter today, than what was passed as a pan-European regulation within Ecodesign last year. And this is really this is the problem. And I would like to speak a little more about this, because this is what we in Denmark foresee as a major problem. Robert mentioned that we have to figure out what has to be a national level and what has to be an European level, fixed on European level. I like to, since now I work with appliances, I like to turn to the next. The Ecodesign Directive is tied to the single European market, so to say. So a product which is sold in one country, one European country, can be applied, can be used in any other country within the Union. Therefore, the Ecodesign Directive has a article that says that you are not allowed to impede, you are not allowed to restrict the free movements of goods. However, this Ecodesign Directive has a special extra wording, which was put in later, in fact, in 2012, when the Energy Efficiency Directive was negotiated, that somehow the member states have still the competence to set requirements, if these requirements are related to or are according to Article 4, Section 1, and Article 8 of Directive 2010 number 31, and that is the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. So what are in Article 4.1 and Article 8 of the Energy Performance, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive? In Article 8, and Robert mentioned it, these are the systems, the heating system, the hot water system, the air conditioning system, the large ventilation system, and combinations of such systems. So these are the systems. The member states are supposed to set requirements for those systems. But nevertheless, we have, on pan-European level, we have requirements for boilers. We have requirements for heating systems too, because you can, the way you define a boiler in the Ecodesign is in fact much more than just the boiler. So, and the number 4 article, the other article, this has to do with the different building elements, so the windows, so to say. So, when I mentioned this, I mentioned this because renovating I mention it because for Denmark it's not only important to look at new buildings when we set energy requirements for buildings. We also want to tackle the problem of addressing the existing building stock. And we, in very short time, the government is going to launch a strategy for renovating of the existing building stock, setting a target for 2050, and how much the energy should be reduced from in existing buildings. And the way you can do that is, of course, that you can address the different building elements. It says, well, we have to tighten the requirements, the energy requirements for those building elements. And one of the things that we're looking at are windows. We haven't got Ecodesign regulation on windows yet, but there are a preparatory study going on, and that might come. So my guess would be that we could very easily have a conflict there, just like we have seen on the boilers and on the heat pumps. There are other products on its way. Solid fuel boilers are on its way, and we can already now see that we're going to have problems because the energy requirement for solid fuel boilers that we have today was rejected by the regulatory committee in December last year. So the Commission will probably come up with some less ambitious requirement than the ones we have today. But let me then just point to what I call the triangular conflict. The triangular conflict is that we have these 3 elements that are not in harmony with each other. The energy performance of buildings directive order or expects that the member states puts requirements in place for building systems and building elements. The Ecodesign directive then says, oh, well, we overrule that anyway, because when it comes to product, we set targets on a pan-European level, and these requirements you are supposed to respect, and you're not supposed to put any hindrance to the free movement of goods. And then, as a third, you have the national code, the national building code, which, so to say, should implement what is in the Buildings Directive. So this conflict, this internal triangle or whatever you would call it, could be solved in different way. And Robert also already mentioned that the Ecodesign Directive, together with the Energy Labeling Directive, is up for review, and there will probably be a redraft in a couple of years. Another way of solving the problem could, of course, be to take one of these, one case to the Court of Justice. But I would say this, I would prefer that this would not be necessary. I think we have a problem with the Ecodesign Directive as it is presently, because it's the way it is written. It's more or less, it's better suited for plug-in products. It's products that are the same in the north, in the south, in the east, and the west of Europe. Whereas for products which are installed or built in buildings, and therefore part of the building and adopted to the climate and where the building is situated, then you have something which is much different. And I think we are a lot of member states who would like to keep our national building code in place and be able to set national requirements that are stricter than what can be found as a compromise or consensus solution on a European level. But I will not give you any more answers. I'll just leave this conflict open to you and say thank you for listening.
Good morning, my name is Jürgen Stürm. I speak on behalf of the European lighting industry, and I'm very privileged to be invited as a speaker for this morning session. Actually, I think the title of the presentation, well, basically has been answered by the two speakers who were speaking before me. The arguments for going beyond requirements at products level for lighting systems, the cases have factually been made. So insofar, I deliberately also build up this presentation a little bit that I don't repeat a lot, but hope to be able to give you some more insights into lighting about the particular challenges and the particular opportunities for lighting actually are. Light is life. So first of all, we have to see that lighting is not yet another source of energy efficiency. The most energy efficient lighting is to sit in the dark, as easy as it is. And that's what actually nobody wants. You know, we all like to live in a well-lit surrounding, and when we can achieve this well-lit surrounding in the context of doing it energy efficiently, I think then we are there. So there is a visual function to light, so that we see each other, that's the main function. There is emotional feelings to it. You all know there are different lightings for different moods, for different situations. All that needs to be taken into account, and I would like to point out one thing, because that's an issue where we are very much at the beginning of doing scientific research. Lighting has a biological function. The light, the artificial light you're exposed to as a human being, is impacting on your circadian rhythm. So it can have an impact on your well-being, on your feelings, and so on. And all that we have to take into account when we talk about lighting. And of course, lighting is an issue what we have to deal with, what we have to address from an energy efficiency point of view. And in the past, we have been doing this. The lighting industry and the lighting products were actually the first product group which was entirely under eco-design requirements. I will come to that. So I think we have taken up our responsibility as an industry to provide energy efficient solutions. But we are functioning in another triangle, actually. the lighting triangle. And efficiency, energy efficiency, is part of that. It's a very important part of it. but it is part of it. It's not the single parameter where we should take a look at when we talk about lighting products and predominantly even more lighting systems. The performance, the good light what we have, the good light what we have a right to have, the contrast, the color, the visuals, that's also part of it. And the comfort, the atmosphere you're in, the well-being, the ambience. This is where we have to balance the three corners of this triangle, and I think this is what we have to see as a basis when we talk about lighting, also in the context of energy efficiency. But the challenge is, of course, there. We are very, very much aware of that. 19% of the electricity for lighting is used for lighting worldwide. There's a figure from the International Energy Agency. That's there. This is where we stand. And of course, there is the need. There's the need to bring down this percentage. So we have to take adequate measures, on the one hand in Europe, on the other hand also maybe globally, to actually bring down this percentage, that we have a significant energy reduction, cost reduction related to lighting in the future. So the consumption, well, that's a figure of 2005, 2,750 terawatt hours. It's significant. It is significant. So the abatement potential for lighting is very clear, and is very well recognized, and has also been started to be used. So the approach, in our opinion, is a twofold one. On the one hand, to employ modern energy efficient lighting products. This is there. This is there. This is actually Regulation 244/2009, which led to the phase out of the incandescent light bulb, which you're all aware created a big noise in the market in Europe, putting political arguments in a discussion where they may not have been very adequately addressed. But this is there. 244 is regulating the energy efficiency of households, of non-directional household lamps. 245, it's maybe a less known regulation, but as important, that deals with the energy efficiency requirements for tertiary lighting. So everything what is in offices, what is at workplaces, what is in street lighting and so on, is also regulated. The products are regulated. So there are minimum performance requirements set for the European Union, that only those products which comply with these minimum performance requirements, which are fairly ambitious anyway, are legally brought on the market in Europe. What is relatively new still is Regulation 1194, which is dealing with directional lamps and LEDs. So we have also, and this was very important, this was about time, we have regulation about light emitting diodes, about LEDs in Europe. This brings a lot of clarity also to the market, because we now have these performance requirements. They are in force. So in so far, I think we are fairly advanced. When I compare the European Union to other global regions, we are fairly advanced in setting minimum performance requirements for products. So in so far, I think we can share now in the time of the revision of the Ecodesign regulations, the Ecodesign process, I think we can share a lot of experience with what we actually have made. How does it impact on the market? How does it impact on perception? What people have towards an industry? How does it impact on stakeholders? All these kind of things need to be addressed, but in so far lighting is at the forefront. There's a second step to it. This is, I think, where we should talk about today. Cut this consumption by using well-designed, installed and operated lighting systems. So I have been talking about step one, the energy efficient products. The phase out has been done. These products are not there anymore. And there is an impact from this legislation. When we evaluate, these are Lighting Europe figures actually. So these are our own estimations, our own market analysis. So the blue graph, which are actually general light sources, incandescent lamps, has a clear tendency towards going down. So this is a phased out product. This is legally not brought on the market. We have an issue with market surveillance still there. We have to address this. So there are still way too many incandescent light bulbs available, wherever they may come from. So market surveillance is an issue there, but the tendency is absolutely clear. The green curve is going up, and the green curve are basically energy-saving lamps, halogen lamps, predominantly low-voltage halogen lamps, LEDs, and compact fluorescent lamps. So there is an impact. There is an impact from legislation, because that's always, I hear it very often. It's always denied, or sometimes denied. Not in this group, of course, but when you talk to other target groups, to other stakeholder groups, they say, well, this is all a theoretical exercise. There is no, we don't save one kilowatt hour of, and we don't save one ton of CO2 by eco-design. It's not true. It's definitely not true. Legislation has an impact. When it's intelligently made and adequately surveyed, legislation has an impact. So the logical next step is to address lighting on the system, on the system level. And this is, at the end of the day, a joint exercise. Bringing a light source to the market requires a technical expertise, requires manufacturing skills, requires some marketing, but it's basically something what the manufacturer does on their own. Addressing systems is a much more complex area. So we have to talk about, and we do this, we talk about it with lighting designers. I think the lighting designer, the architect, has a core role if we want to do the step from products to systems. The installer has a clear, very decisive role, and one of the issues which were addressed, where does the product end and where does the system begin? Yes, this is probably the decisive factor, but this is not something what we would decide from a lighting industry perspective only. We would give our contribution, we would give our arguments, we would give our expertise. But we would not be in a position to define this. We would only be in a position to define this and have it defined when all the stakeholders, all the necessary stakeholders along the value chain, the architect, the installer, the lighting designer, have a say, and they come to a conclusion, say, okay, this is how we understand a lighting system, and these are the performance criteria, the performance requirements which should be allocated to such a lighting system. The situation today, and I think that's, for me, always one of the most striking slides. Basically, we have 90% of the European lighting installations are as intelligent as they can be switched on and off. That's the situation. And when I take a look at this room, I would also doubt that we have an intelligent lighting installation here. Because had we daylight controls, I would not assume that we would have 6 luminaires on with, I can't count how many halogen lamps are in there. But we would not, I don't think we would negatively impact our well-being in this room if these lights went off automatically, because there are large windows, there are floor-to-ceiling windows here. So daylight linking has a penetration rate of -8%. Almost not there. Presence detection. Also, when I sat in the audience, I thought, well, what a wonderful piano we have here. It's well lit. There is no one around in the back there. So why do we have these lights on? Why do we have these lights on? An intelligent installation would switch them off automatically. Presence detection is also around 8% penetration rate. When we come to time management, it's even worse. And when we come to the combination of all that, to have a constant illumination level, almost inexistent. Almost inexistent. There's a reason to that, because it's very simple. The building owner, the landlord of rented office space, for instance, does not pay for the lighting. It's the tenant who pays for the lighting with the monthly bill. So there is no real incentive for a landlord to put in place intelligent lighting systems. Why should they? Why should they? They don't have an immediate benefit out of it. So the argument is they should, because it has a significant savings potential. But as long as we don't adequately address the so-called landlord-tenant conflict there, this may all end up in theoretical calculations, and we all know, yes, there is a huge savings potential, great, perfect, brilliant, but nobody will do it. At least I doubt it for indoor applications. It may be different with outdoor applications, because in outdoor, the community, the municipality, they actually have to pay the energy bill. So there is a much more accessible stakeholder group in municipalities, in cities, who are benevolently looking into refurbishing, beefing up their street lighting system. Because they get a benefit out of it. They have a payback time. Well, I say here 7 years. I could imagine, because this figure is already a year old, that today we are even below 7 years. So the new generations of LEDs, I think they even have a more beneficial ratio between upfront investment on the one hand and payback on the other hand. So these calculations are available, and there's a multitude of pilots out there already. There's a multitude of case analysis and case studies out there. So this basically is a done deal. So we have to ask ourselves, why is not every municipality jumping on that and says, well, the first thing we do is we refurbish our street lighting system. And there are challenges to that. There is awareness. There is, of course, it has a certain upfront cost. Not every community or city council would be accessible for an argument. Yes, we have a 5-year payback time. If, well, my lecture period is only 4 years, so I couldn't care less about 5 years. So all that we have to take into account. It is about awareness. It is about reaching out to cities. It's about reaching out to decision makers. So insofar here, I think there is definitely a potential which can be exploited. But I would like to go beyond a little bit. So it's not only when we talk about making the business case of street lighting predominantly, that it's only about payback periods. There is much more to that. Improved street lighting has an impact on the safety or the perceived safety of citizens. I think each one of us likes to go out by night when I have an adequately lit square. I feel safe, I feel comfortable. If I don't have that, even if the situation is actually not changing, I feel differently. Lighting cities is also an aesthetic thing. It's not only about energy efficiency. We can achieve improvements in workplaces, learning, healthcare. I spoke about the biological, the human-centric aspect of lighting. And it may change citizens' perceptions to the living environment. So it's not only about getting the least consuming, the highest energy efficient solution into my city. It's about having all sectors, all angles of this triangle adequately addressed. And what gives us this possibility now is LED technology, because we can do this now. We have a highly energy efficient lighting solution available, which allows us now to address these items without compromising too much on the energy performance. And there is an opportunity out. There's a European opportunity out, and I'm very thankful to DG Energy and DG Connect to take a look into an option of developing a European lighting strategy. And we think that including the systems approach in the different facets and different dimensions I was trying to talk about, should more adequately address in the revision of the Energy Efficiency Directive and also in the revision of the Energy Performance in Buildings Directive. So I would like to see, or we would like to see, it's not only about the industry, I think it's that the whole lighting community would like to see that lighting is addressed in the same way as ventilation, heating, and so on. And what we can offer there, we can offer the expertise. We can offer the expertise what we have out of Ecodesign. We can offer the technical expertise what we have. So we would be very much willing to integrate ourselves as an industry in the preparatory activities which lead to the revision of these two directives. And I see, of course, the issue: how does it interfere with the competences in member states? Absolutely. Absolutely, I see. I think it was very important. It was very important from Hans from the Danish agency to highlight this conflict, because that's definitely, well, should we speak of conflict? Let's say maybe you can address it from two angles. I would say I would not speak of a conflict there. But we have to take into account that there may be different approaches to it. I think we have a good opportunity now, from a lighting point of view, to address these items in a lighting strategy which is hopefully coming up in the course of the year, which is under preparation, where we think this can set the scene to really bring systems, lighting systems, from an energy efficiency point of view, from a comfort point of view, also from a point of view of enhancing the competitiveness of the European industry, because energy issues are not only there in Europe, they're there globally, and we have replies to that. That we use this time now, as it stands in 2014, to set the scene that we are adequately prepared for the revision of the EED and the EPBD. But we have to think beyond. And these are two slides which I took from a presentation from a colleague in DG Connect, who is dealing with interoperability of energy efficiency data in buildings. The magic word is Internet of Things, machine-to-machine communication. This is, I'm very, very convinced that this is actually the next step. So we talked about the LEDification, we talk about energy efficiency from a product point of view. We talk also about energy efficiency from a system point of view, when we take into account replacing currently available or currently extended lighting products with LED. That's the LEDification. This is there. This is happening. But the next step, which is awaiting us around the corner, is digitalization. Digitalization of light, digitalization of buildings. So our expectation is actually that the cards are very much newly shuffled in this regard. We have a number of new stakeholders coming in there, stakeholders whom we might not even know today. The question is, who will set the standards for these integrated machine-to-machine communication appliances? Who will set the standards for them? Will it still be lighting standards? Who will define the performance of lighting installations? Or will it be different standards? Will it be general building standards in this regards? Will it be, which role will software development, software update play? So insofar, I think this is the next step where we have to prepare the scene. And insofar, I would be delighted if the workshop today would also be in a position or willing to take a little bit a look out towards the current scheme, what we have of Ecodesign, of Ecodesign systems. How do we correlate with our products, in our case lighting products, but I would assume that counts for each product group. How do we correlate and take into account that the digitalization, which is impacting our products, is, if not yet there, but definitely something which we may expect in the very, very close future. So we have to set the scene there, we have to prepare the grounds. From a lighting perspective, I would also say this is an issue we would like to address with all the stakeholders in the development and setup of the European lighting strategy, because things are changing. They're very profoundly changing. and we have to prepare to be a subject of this change rather than an object. This is, I think, for the baseline with what I want to conclude from a lighting industry perspective. We would like to remain the master of our own destiny, together with all the stakeholders who have a say, who have a stake in energy efficient lighting, but we never would like to become, and we never will become, an object of that we are governed by somebody else. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so please, could you hand the microphone up?
Thank you. Edward Toulouse, consultant. My question is to Mr. Sturm. This morning we've heard that on some examples the energy consumption for lighting can be cut by up to 90% using existing technologies for products and installations. In one of your first slides, you seem to only target a 50% cut. So my question is, why such a modest objective, and why don't you challenge us and your members more, because it's feasible?
No, I would agree, and I think, you know, what we should do is that we should take an open look at figures as they are presented, because I think what we definitely can say as a baseline, there is still significant, very significant potential in cutting energy demands and energy consumption from lighting when moving to the system level. If it's 50%, if it's 90%, I could well imagine that this is also something what we should analyze on a case-by-case basis. I could well imagine that we have applications where there is definitely these 90% cuts, as we have seen them this morning, where they are possible. I would definitely believe in that, and I think we would be very, very, very much willing in taking a look into even more enhanced opportunities which are out there than the ones which I presented. So we are usually always known as an industry who rather sends a conservative picture, but we achieve it, rather than raising expectations and we don't achieve it. But I think we could definitely say that if we address it correctly, if you all address it correctly, to bring lighting energy efficiency from the system point of view to the next level, I think a sentence like "the sky is the limit" is not exaggerated. We are definitely willing to take a very creative look into that. So the slide should not be understood that we would see a threshold or a line at 50%. That would not be the case.
Edith Bolemeroek, Ecofis. I have a question for Peter Nielsen. You mentioned that in Denmark there's a conflict between the Ecodesign requirements for boilers and the EPBD requirements for boilers. Can you comment on the perceived fit of energy labeling requirements for boilers, the installer label for Denmark? Are there conflicts there, or do you perceive it as beneficial? Can you comment?
Does it work? Oh, yeah. Well, the energy labeling builds upon the eco-design requirements, but the problems that we see with the installer label is more organizational and practical. That you somehow have to control, when you are a market surveillance authority, you have to control what's being installed, and you cannot be out there in all the different homes or all the different buildings and see what's in fact being installed, because the label, the installer can put the label at the point of sale on the package, and that of course can give some practical problems in installing. Otherwise, if it's a package that's been announced and you can see it advertised in papers and so on, of course you can check whether these different elements really add up to what is on the label of the package when displayed in
in an ad, but if the thing is only assembled at point of sale out at the customer, then it's very, very difficult to control for a market surveillance authority.
Yes, good morning. Evelyn Shellikins from the European Association of the Electrical Installers. I could only support that, saying that a system usually is, especially in the electrical field, an assembly of different components. So our question has always been, if you go to a system level, again, where does the product end, where the system begins, and how do you calculate the performance of an assembly of different components? That's the first question, or practically that might be difficult. If you then go to the package system, I would say, sold as a system, what is happening if one of the components within the package is broken, or you have to change it or replace it? To whom goes the responsibility and the liability of the whole system in the end?
I mean, I don't know if this question was addressed to me, and I don't have the answer to this question. I mean, in the sense that it's exactly, those are exactly the questions that we would have to grapple with as soon as we start tackling them. The question of liability is again another issue. I would say that is, I mean, while important, not something that we would typically tackle under energy efficiency legislation, but might be tackled by contract law or what have you. I guess that in terms of market surveillance, these are key questions as to, you know, what are you going to control, and what if something is missing or if something is failing, where does the responsibility lie? And there is when you as an installer put a label on your installed package, then the responsibility, at least for the correctness of that label, should lie with you, because you are the one who integrates the various products. If then it turns out that the boiler is the one that is causing the issue in terms of non-compliance with, for example, the label, then you as an installer would have to take recourse with the manufacturer of that boiler. I mean, so my guess is that it would work more or less in that kind of sequence. But this will be different for different product systems as well. It's probably not possible to, you know, come up with a single way of dealing with this for heating systems and ventilation systems and lighting systems, where the configuration of the chain is also different.
Hi, Kieran Mayers from Sony. Hello. I was just very interested in terms of the IT network side of things and IT systems. Can the same type of approach as used for building systems be applied here, where we're looking at the service of processing and transferring data, which can happen anywhere in the world and happens in an instant and happens actually all over the world? How do you know which packet of data is processed where? And if you set up protocols for communication and labeling or installation of those systems in Europe, how do then those IT networks correspond with global protocols and types of operations which are not visible to the user? Or so can we really transfer those approaches into that systems domain and still expect the networks to function competitively or in any way? I just wonder how that thinking may apply and how that might develop when you start looking at IT networks, which can be of any type of scope.
I think you said it already. How will the thinking develop? And at the moment, I would not be in a position to reply to this question, because we are very much at the beginning there. We also need to see that's a very, very valid remark. How do standards, how do regulations in this context, how do they correlate with standards, regulations which are developed elsewhere? Is this at the end of the day a global issue? Yes, could be. Could be. Do we have the adequate fora? Do we have the adequate networks to deal with it? To a certain extent, I would say yes, it's there, but only to a certain extent. We are definitely not finished. I think what could be an interesting development, what we see recently in talks coming out from DG Energy, is that the DG, and maybe Robert can elaborate more on that, is exactly thinking along the lines what is the international dimension of ecodesign. So we consider this from a lighting industry point of view. We consider this very, very important, because at the end of the day, lighting products are, from light sources, are global commodity products. So we surely have an interest that there are comparable regulations. There are even maybe congruent regulations in place in the different parts of the world. But exactly what you raise, this needs to be addressed in these fora. This needs to be addressed in the dialogue between the European authorities and their counterparts elsewhere. This is to be addressed also in industry networks, and I have to say self-critically, we are not necessarily there as a lighting industry that we have this level of dialogue with our partners in China, in the Middle East, in the US, in India, in Japan. We have networks established, so we talk to each other, of course. But I think we have not yet gone this decisive step that we would be in a position to actually adequately address and output-orientedly address these items. So for the lighting industry, we have to face it. These are very, very new developments. So we don't exactly know for the time being what digitalization of light means. What are the new stakeholders? What are the new groups to talk to? What is the new value chain at the end of the day? So there we have a very, very open. Well, I wouldn't say it's an open future, but we definitely have challenges along the way for the next couple of years. What the industry, maybe also other industries, did not have in the last 100 years. So it's really changing everything.
Maybe just to add from our perspective, I think we are now slowly but surely starting to gain some experience with networks. We have the network standby regulation, which is for the first time addressing questions along the lines of, okay, how does a network operate? How do you control it? What is the influence of things being plugged in? What's the influence of software, etc., etc. And that's only at the European level for the time being. It's clear that especially the IT sector is probably the first sector where we would have to look at internationalization, I would say, of how we tackle these things. Because not only because they operate globally, but also because the economic operators tend to be global players. I mean, so there is a need to look at that. As Jürgen hinted towards, I mean, we are slowly but surely trying to look a bit beyond European borders when it comes to eco-design and energy labeling. We focused very much over the last years in getting the regulations in place for the various product groups, and now we will try and see whether there is scope for more international cooperation, whereby I would like to underline that, at least from our perspective, we believe that industry has a key role to play. I don't think this can happen just by us as the European Commission talking to the Department of Energy in the US or to a ministry in Japan. I think here, because of the fact that this is a global, especially IT, are global sectors, we need to involve industry from the beginning in terms of seeing what we can do. Whether that means we would have the same requirements everywhere within the next 5 years, I don't know. I think we will probably have to look at it almost product by product or sector by sector approach and see what is the scope for harmonization of testing protocols, harmonization of standards, and subsequently potentially harmonization of requirements. But I think that's more into the future, I would say.
Okay, we have 2 more quick questions before the coffee break. So
I have a question to the Commission. Marta Dobrek-Kleindorf. My question is about this eco-design requirements for products, because it is really worrying if some member states have to, are too ambitious and have to go down. So I was wondering whether the Commission have thought already about solutions for now under the regulations, how they are now in the existing legal framework. and whether it was thinking how to maybe solve it for the future through the revision of eco-design and energy labeling. So just would want to learn a little bit more, because even under the legal framework, I'm not sure whether you are considering derogations under internal market. I don't know whether it would apply to this particular case. So we just want to know more. Thank you.
I mean, that's a difficult question, of course. It's clear that if you look at the example that also Peter gave about where we have requirements for heating products, boilers under Ecodesign, and where the EPBD requires member states to set system requirements for heating systems, these, as far as we are concerned, do not necessarily conflict with each other. It really depends on how member states put in place these requirements under Article 8 of the EPBD. While I can see, just to stick with the examples I gave, while I can see the Dutch situation being perfectly in line with what is required under Ecodesign, what some Italian regions have done is clearly not in line, because that would clearly breach internal market regulations. So I think it really very much depends on a case-by-case basis whether what member states do under the EPBD for technical building systems, for which there are also Ecodesign requirements, whether that is a conflict or not. But we do see conflicts, and we clearly see that there are member states that want to go further than what in the end is established at European level. I think that here we are this is just the constraint that we have, because we work with 28 member states in a single market, whereby a single Ecodesign regulation will mean that some member states will struggle, or some industries in some member states will struggle in meeting the requirements, whereas in other member states the requirements are already stricter. And as long as we stay with products, and as long as we stay with internal market regulations as we have them today, that will remain the same. I don't think that Ecodesign per se is going to be able to tackle that issue, because it's much wider than just Ecodesign. It applies to toys, and it applies to machinery and what have you. So it's not only Ecodesign. Whether derogations are possible, I mean, the revision, the Energy Efficiency Directive made a revision to the Ecodesign Directive by inserting this clause that is intended to give a bit more scope to member states to implement the EPBD. But the question is, in practice, whether that clause is really going to help in a legal sense. And it might well be, I mean, that a member state or the Commission would have to take a member state to court, and the court will have to decide whether what the member state has done is in line or not in line with, in the end, the treaty, and not only Ecodesign or the EPBD. Because and there you say, I mean, I would like to answer a question to the Commission. In these kind of situations, the Commission has different views, in the sense that if you talk to my colleagues in DG Enterprise, who are responsible for the internal market, or in DG Competition, they will say something different. And we will say, well, of course, member states should have as much scope as possible to put in place energy efficiency requirements, because that's what we are aiming for with our policies. Whereas DG Enterprise colleagues will say, yeah, but sorry, but we have an internal market and we need to protect the internal market. So it's not such a clear-cut situation. And so that's why, in the end, we might well have to end up in court to get, hopefully, a clearer line on where these boundaries sit. I don't know whether whether a revision of the Ecodesign Directive or of the EPBD Directive will be able to solve this problem, but it's definitely something we are aware of, and we will want to tackle in one way or another, if possible.
Okay, one last question for the coffee.
Thank you. Pernille Schellab from CLASP. Well, first of all, since I think I have the last question, but to thank you for a very interesting bouquet of presentations, very thought-stimulating. I want to come at this from a slightly different angle. I remember in the ECEE proceedings 2011, there was a very interesting paper by one of the speakers in the next session about how seemingly simple forms of energy management, such as the use of thermostats in the home, can be difficult to implement in the way it's designed to be implemented. And my question is, because I was very impressed by the slide from Niels, that by applying a systems approach, we can get the same again as we have from the current setup of the Ecodesign Directive. I wonder how vulnerable that potential is to the user interface. So what are the demands on the user, whether it's in the home or whether it's in buildings, installing, signing off, managing, subsequently these systems? It's a question to the panel, for those who have appetite for that sort of slightly more social science-oriented question. Thank you.
If I may, because I could imagine I should not be the only one to respond to that, because this is actually where the be or not to be of increasing energy efficiency by system lies. It's the acceptance of consumers, of clients, of people who are using it. And I think so. So insofar, I think it's absolutely important to take a look at this social science question, more or less, because we will not save 1 ton, not even a gram of CO2 if we do theoretical exercises. We can make millions of papers, we will not have an impact. We will have an impact only when the concepts which are elaborated and the products and the systems which are brought on the market are accepted by citizens. I've touched a little bit on the landlord-tenant conflict. This is also to be overcome in this context. But I could imagine that a very simple answer may go into a certain direction. We have to make it simple. Systems, energy efficient systems, have to be dealt with in a simple, simplistic way. Only then they will be accepted. And the best, maybe the best option would be that we don't even need a human, in quotation marks, interface to it, that the system is smart enough to bring the energy bill down as far as possible, and that's also how I understood Edouard's opening question, to go as far as by any means possible. It will only be possible from my point of view if the system is one which is manageable in a simple way, which does not cause a lot of knowledge, dedication, taking a look at how things are really working behind the scene, behind the surface. If you put these requirements to the users of systems, I'm not sure that the uptake rate will be very high. So the human factor is definitely a very, very decisive one if you really want to achieve an impactful energy savings. It's not about theoretical exercise, it's really about bringing things down to reality and implement them.
It's an important question. It's clear that, just coming from the buildings experience also, where we are moving towards nearly zero energy buildings, which means that you get more airtight buildings if people start opening the windows at inopportune times, then the savings that we are supposed to gain are not going to be realized. If you see systems like heat pumps and fairly complicated heating systems coming in, how do people deal with that? Often it turns out that people just have the standard setting as it is in the start, and they just leave it like that, even though you would have to vary the settings. I think one solution there is controls, to some extent more automation, taking some of these decisions out of the hands of people and have them done by professionals that know how this works, so that some of the savings can be gained in that way. Another way is by more education, by making people more aware of what they can save and how they can save. Another is by giving them more information. The whole smart meters, giving people access to their energy consumption through their smartphones, etc., will create more awareness and more action by people. And so there are different ways. Whether we can, I mean, I tend to think that we will not be able to legislate for that. It will have to come through other instruments that we create more awareness and more willingness of people to act to save more energy and hence also more money. And that's another link that we might be able to make, for example, by giving more information about savings because of buying an A++ appliance or what have you. So there are different answers to that question, whereby legislation is probably not the best suited instrument.
Okay, so I'm sure there are a lot of interesting points left for discussion, but we have 2 more sessions and the panel discussion, so I would suggest that we thank the speakers again for the interesting presentations.